Somebody said to me years ago that ideas at the beginning are like baby tigers, and baby tigers need to be looked after. They're not ready to go out into the wild on their own. And so if you're using these ideas and insights to drive change in a way that an organization is going to market, you're thinking about reinventing a guest experience, you're thinking about working differently, changing product. How do you take the organization with you, right? How do you get people to a place where they understand that? Buy-in for people is super important.
Welcome to Any Insights Yet? The podcast that explores the intersection of strategy, inspiration, and branding. I'm Chris Kocek. This episode is especially personal for me as I talk to Tracy Lovatt, former planning director at BBDO New York and CEO of Batten Co. Tracy gave me my start in strategic planning back in the summer of 2007. And if it weren't for Tracy saying, "I think we'd like to keep you here in planning," all those years ago, who knows what I'd be doing today. During her 20 plus years at BBDO, Tracy helped a wide variety of brands influence the cultural conversation, including HBO, Hyatt Hotels, GE, Bank of America, PepsiCo, and more. But as Tracy explains in our interview, she eventually decided to step away from advertising because she felt like insights and the application of insights shouldn't be confined to a particular medium. These days, with her team at Batten Co., Tracy is helping brands connect the dots between tectonic shifts in culture, customer behavior, and day-to-day operations, creating value for brands that goes well beyond advertising. During our conversation, we talk about a number of aha moments she's had during her career, including the hidden stresses of business travel for women and the very different ways men and women talk about engagement rings. We also look at Tracy's process for disarming a room full of executives and how she embraces chaos to get to clarity. We begin, though, with a cheeky question that I've always wanted to ask her. Do you think the British accent helps you be more effective than your American counterparts?
Such a great question. Do I think it helps me be more effective? I have never understood why Americans, generally speaking, seem to have an attraction to and an affection for the British accent. And I'll tell you a funny story about that. When I first came to the States, I had an aha moment one day where I suddenly realized that everyone around me sounded American.
What does it sound like to be American? When you said, I just suddenly recognized that everybody around me sounded like an American. What does that sound like?
I don't know. I mean, it's gone and it's completely gone away. You don't sound American to me. You sound like Chris. I can't anymore. And I wonder whether or not is that an interesting parallel for other things, which is we get into a groove and you can't hear it any longer. When you asked me that question, I was genuinely surprised because I don't think of myself. I can't tell that it sounds any different any longer.
I can't remember if I was in the room with you or if I only heard you tell this story later, but it was on Hyatt Hotels. And there was some sort of rewards program that had very complicated math where it was like a stay at this location would equal this many points, which would then currency exchange over to this thing and then some other thing. And you said, so you're saying that this equals this. And then you said, well, fuck me. And I was like, I don't think an American could say that because even when you say fuck me, it just sounds so intelligent. Whereas when an American says it, it sounds crude.
It's interesting. Part of what we do and part of what I've done for the last 15 or so years at Batten is help people kind of blow things up a bit, right? And not feel like it's disruption for the sake of it. But I do think we need to suspend belief, right? I do think we need to put ourselves in a place where we can bring honesty into the room and we can say, okay, you know what? We're going to take an objective view of this. And it's a really difficult thing to do because we're human and we're not objective. So what happens is people bring all of their bias, right? All of their experience, all of their wisdom, all of their not so wisdom, all of their sacred cows into the room. And again, I'd never thought about that before, but I do think that potentially the way you sound, right, the way you deliver things, and one of the things I've always said about Batten, Chris, is it isn't just what we do. It's how we do it. This is about trying to put people into a space where you can pull the lens up really high. We pull the lens up, back, sideways, twist it, and surround people in data and insights and have them find patterns. And I think to do that effectively and come out with people feeling that they found a space, right, that they can move forward, rather than feel threatened by it, you have to create the conditions for that. And I'm a big believer in that. I'm a big believer in creating the conditions for people to be able to do that kind of work. So for me, you better have looked at the data, right? I'm old enough to have grown up in a world where I used to sit there when I was a baby at Ogilvy, and it was a pitiful experience with a ruler looking at lines and lines of data. MRI crosstabs, they were not done on a computer. So to be able to find patterns in those kinds of things and to have people be able to get out their comfort zone is really important. I mean, there's nothing more inspiring, right, than a whiteboard in a conference room with fluorescent light to get you going. I mean, we don't do that. I wonder why. I was thinking earlier about, when the Medicis didn't do that. I don't think they thought that they were going to get to enlightenment and transformation by saying, you know what, it's going to look like a motorway service station. Take a Sharpie, you'll be fine.
There's that sarcasm, that British sarcasm.
Maybe it helps.
I will tell you my hypothesis on why Americans assume Brits are automatically smarter than everyone else. It's because we grew up watching countless documentaries in school or elsewhere where the narrator was most likely British. And therefore, we assume it's coming from a place of authority and knowledge. That's a hypothesis. It's a working hypothesis.
Well, I think there's a lot to be said for what we are surrounded by when we grow up. And actually, we've used that with brands, which is what's the era that a brand grew up in? And how did you become who you are? Because you grew up in that era. And it's really fascinating when you do that kind of cultural analysis, because it does impact the way you see the world.
I think there's also an inflection shift with the British accent. So I think there's a politeness to it that's a little bit different that maybe makes people more at ease. And so they want to be polite back. Not always, but a lot of times.
I haven't found that's always the case. And the thing is, I can tell you that it doesn't transfer when you leave the soil of the US and I go back to the UK. Definitely not polite to me there. So I'm going to observe that going forward. See if people are more polite to me. So I've got an English. And now I can hear myself sounding like an English person. That's thanks to you. I couldn't hear that before.
It's time for tea.
And I think the other thing, Chris, honestly, is we do use sarcasm and irony. And the use of sarcasm and irony, or if you like, some form of humor like that, can disarm what can, I think, be explosive sometimes for people. So by bringing that nuance in, right, by making something slightly funny, mischievous, and I don't think that's a bad thing when we're dealing often with complex business problems. It's okay to have a bit of levity in the room and be a bit mischievous, when people are wading through, challenging change. I think it's all right.
That's a great point.
I think the other thing it does is it makes it human. Right? We become human in that. And there's corporate behavior, you know what I mean? Corporate behavior, corporate speak, corporate rules, they're not often very helpful. I think we need to bring humanity into it and a bit of levity into it. And I do think that's a useful thing because we need honesty with one another. So making that connection is an important thing. So I think there's hope for us despite the fact that we're moving into a world, not just of AI, but AGI. It's like I'm holding on.
Yes, AGI. We might circle back around to that one. What is one of the strangest or most interesting things someone has ever said in a focus group or a research context that made you say, wait, what was that? Could you say that one more time?
A couple of things come to mind for me. We did some really interesting work for a very big global jewelry brand in the area of engagement. And their lunch was being eaten by lab-grown diamonds. And we set up these focus groups or discussion groups. And actually, we didn't set them in a focus group facility. We had people sort of sit around in a group over wine and cheese and crackers and just have a chat, which was much more effective than sitting with them thinking they were being filmed and all of that stuff. So that goes back to our disarming. But we had groups of men and women, and then we had groups of men on their own and women on their own, and the conversations were completely different. So when men were in a group with other men, they started to get into this conversation. I mean, they could have been talking about large screen televisions or cars. They turned diamonds and engagement into performance. It was fascinating. And then women, when they were on their own, it was a very sort of romantic version of what was sort of supposed to be happening. And we realized that there was a very interesting disconnect. When you put people into the room together, they weren't having the same conversation. And the client's narrative of what was happening was sitting outside that. It was actually a lot more dynamic, a lot more individualistic, that men knew a lot more. They had a lot more access to information. They knew a lot more. The client really believed that men were walking into the store with no idea of what they were supposed to do, kind of quaking in their boots. And actually they were fully informed and had been having these conversations about this investment they were going to make in the same way they would think about buying a car. And women equally had been having this conversation about the romantic moment. So what it resulted in, and it wasn't one comment, it was the difference in the dynamics in the room, but what it resulted in was us, more than anything, actually changing the experience that people had when they went into this store, because we changed the experience for the associates when they were talking to women on their own, when they were there with their friends, when men were there on their own, when they were there with another male, and when they were there together. And it worked. So that was a very interesting thing to watch, that kind of dynamic unfold. Another example that comes to mind for me was, I remember it was for hotels. How could you become a destination for female business travelers? So we put people together and we put clients in the room, actually general managers in the room, and then ran these kind of swarm sessions and debates. And we knew people were very dissatisfied with the experience of travel, particularly women. And it led to interesting things, Chris. One was getting people to talk about it and honestly kind of complain about the experience that they had with clients in the room, right, with general managers in the room. And I remember one woman in this room talking about traveling with children. She was a producer. She was often traveling with her young child, and she had to breastfeed. Mm-hmm. And she talked about how she would get into the room and she would need to breastfeed her son, but she would need to pump milk. And she said, there's these fridges that are in the rooms are ridiculous, because you move a drink and then it charges you because you move the Pepsi, and I need to put my breast milk in there. And why don't people think about it? We had a coffee break, and the general manager came up to me in this coffee break, and she said, she stayed in my hotel, and she said, we would have bought something to her. I've got a basement full of fridges. I could have bought a different fridge to her room. She just needed to ask. We had an anthropologist in the room, and I talked to her about it, and I said she just needed to ask. And she said to me, women don't ask. They won't ask. They will find a workaround. She's going to move the Pepsi bottle. So again, it was really interesting because by getting that sort of deep into the conversation, we changed the way that we talked to women, and we changed the way that the hotel interacted. So we put stuff in front of them. We didn't expect them to ask. We made sure that they understood, and we made it really easy. The other thing with hotels that seems really obvious to me now, but didn't until we started doing the research, was the conversation in the category was always around, the bed or the gym or the food or the thing or a workout program. And actually, the thing that we recognized when we did a lot of this work and pulled the lens back is that business travel is very stressful for people, particularly for women. And the stress, Chris, starts way before they leave the house. It starts the night before. Right? So there are a lot of things that we could do to make that journey easier for them and to make their arrival easier and to make them feel acknowledged and to anticipate their arrival. We started to change in the dynamics of the hotel experience that had nothing to do with the hardware, if that makes sense, of the hotel. Those are some interesting things that have happened kind of along the way.
Well, what I love about these examples is that the efforts that come out of it are affecting operations. It's not meant to necessarily affect advertising or some kind of like messaging at some high level to bring people in. It's about making adjustments in the case of the diamonds, making adjustments with how the staff interact with people when they come in. So it's almost like a staff education program. In the case of the hotels, it's helping them change some things operationally. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, and I think, as you know, I moved away from being in the business, if you like, of trying to get to insight and trying to develop strategies that were confined to the medium, if you like, of using creativity and using strategy to get to communication, to get to content. And I don't invalidate that. I spent a big part of my career doing that, and it taught me almost everything I know. I think the interesting thing, Chris, about working with creative people in an agency when you're a planner is you need to get to insight that is usable and actionable and inspiration and does something for somebody. So, there's nothing quite like, you've been there and I've been there, right? It's quite like developing the insight, walking in with a creative brief to a creative person who looks at you like you've lost your mind. They're like, what? What am I supposed to do with that? I don't know what to do with that. I go away and do something else. So for me, the business that we're in these days and have been in for a long time is about the experience. I don't run a company that is a hammer looking for a nail. I'm trying, through the work that we do, what we're doing is making sure that our clients' ambition is met more easily and applying creativity and strategy to that, and that can come in any form. So it's often not communications. So a lot around the experience, a lot around the different dynamics. I think brands are much bigger than that. And that's, I think, a really interesting area to play in. And if you think about hotels, it's incredibly expensive to change the things in a hotel. Bathrooms, you change them once every kind of 10, 15 years. They're massively expensive. Changing an experience and having your associates think differently about the experience, think about welcoming a guest differently, small things that you can do in rooms that come about because you hang out in hotel rooms and observe people using hotel lobbies isn't expensive, but can manifestly improve the experience for guests and therefore improve your bottom line. That for me is a really interesting space to play.
So what's your favorite part when it comes to a strategy project like the ones you're talking about? Is it that first meeting with the client where they're telling you what their challenges are? Is it looking at the data, maybe not with a ruler anymore, but just looking at the data, talking to people, connecting the dots between qualitative and quantitative, or is there something else entirely?
I think for me, honestly, there's probably two areas, Chris. The first part of it that I really love is what I would call the sort of abject mess of it all. Right? It's akin to saying, you kind of know that you need to clean your wardrobe out and you haven't done it for a while, and you also know how marvelous it's going to feel when you get through it. But it is one almighty mess on the way there. And I love that. I really love it. And I realized a long time ago that I can't think in PowerPoint. I can't think in slides. I just can't do it. For me, I have to have things around me. It's a spatial thing. And I realized by accident, when I used to sit and I would take big pieces of paper and a Sharpie. Now I look back on it, right? I can see, maybe I was high because of the Sharpie. I don't know what it was, but I would have to put stuff on a wall and I would have to have it there and I would sit in it. I would literally sit in this mess in my office. And as I sort of developed the business in this way of thinking at Batten, which is very much about immersion, which is very much about we're going to poke the bear, we're going to look at sacred cows, we would sit in mess. And I learned that I didn't understand that there was actually an anthropological reason why this way of thinking works. So one piece of that is to sit in liminality, and people don't like it. People want to get to a destination. I've hired lots of people, brilliant people about it, who've come in and said, I've got the answer. I know what it is. And I'm like, I don't think you do. And that's not what we're here to do yet. Right? So I love that. I think everything is data. Everything is a clue, whether it's a behavior or it's literally a piece of data or it's a sound or it's a thought that comes to you. So we work in a way, and I've always worked in a way where I literally put everything on the wall and it's not metaphoric. And I sit in it and I think about it, and it's uncomfortable. And I love that part of it. And I love the debate. We will have people in a room having the debate, and we do that internally, and we do it with our clients. And you have to be careful about how you do it. But I love sitting in that mess. Because I don't know where the red thread will come from. I don't know where the ideals will come from. But I know that it's in there somewhere. And I've been doing it long enough to know that it's not as terrifying as it appears to be. And when you come out the other end of it, it's manifestly capable of changing people in organizations. So I love that part of it. And then the other part of it that I really like is when clients take it from you, if that makes sense, right? It's not yours any longer, right? So our job is to lay the goods out, if you like, find the insights, find these connections, put people into a space where they can see things in a different light that they haven't necessarily seen before. And I love that. And I've been in many, many rooms, Chris, where you see somebody take it, the light bulb goes off, and then the organization, the other people in that room are like, oh yeah, oh, I see that. And they get it. And we're invisible. And that's magic. And you know what that feels like. The minute that somebody can take an idea and then start generating something, I love that. And I love strategy that's actionable, that you can turn into actual things.
Have you ever had a client say, I don't have time for an academic exercise?
Oh, yeah. For years. Years.
What do you say to them when they say that?
So you don't have to do it, we'll do it for you. The work that we do is absolutely not an academic exercise. I've got no interest in that. I'm not in some delusional world. We're in the business of unlocking opportunities for clients to make ambition real. That's really what we do. And our job is to do that. However, I will say that it is much more effective to do high quality thinking and to push at that thinking and to bring all sorts of different kinds of data and research together in a space, Chris, and let that kind of combust in a conversation. Let's really bring things into the room that are provocative and then make change, because that's the business that we're in ultimately, in the business of propelling where our clients can get to. So I don't see any of it. I don't see it as academic. I see it more as sort of hygienic and stuff you've got to do. Clients have so much data. And again, very little insight. It's sort of sitting there. We don't ask people to participate necessarily in the mess. It's like, give us the mess. Give us every single piece of data you've got. And we'll either discard it or not. And if we find something, we're going to share it with you. And if we don't, we're not going to bore you to death with it.
What's the most precarious part of what you do? You talked about loving the mess and sorting through the mess and having a client take the idea and start to build off of it and run with it. And that's so exciting. Is there a particular part of a project that feels it's very tenuous or precarious?
Somebody said to me years ago that ideas at the beginning, like baby tigers, and baby tigers need to be looked after. They're not ready to go out into the wild on their own. And it really made me think, I believe that that's true. I think that we have to nurture these ideas. Actually, Greg Hahn had a brilliant insight when he brought it to life in a fantastic, what was a TV commercial for G around imagination. And it was the idea of an idea that needed to be nurtured. And the idea became a physical manifestation in the work that Greg did. So there was this disheveled, furry idea that was depressingly walking around the streets, in the rain with matted fur. And then finally, in this fantastic piece of communication, got invited in. It's a brilliant insight that when the idea was invited in, when the idea had its hair washed, he had his beard combed, and he was freshened up, and he was cared for, and he was nurtured, and he was with other people who respected ideas, he flourished. And he changed the world. So I believe in that. And for me, that's the most precarious thing, right? Which is, I think if you do the work, Chris, you're going to get to a good place. I mean, I've been doing it for long enough to know that you will get there. And we set out on a journey and say, oh, we think we need this, we think we need this. We go out, we do research, we do learning, we do observational work, we bring in semioticians, we do all the right stuff. And then we still get stuck. And we keep on going. And then you find a way through.
Sorry, Tracy, your phone is dinging. The first couple of dings were really good because it coincided with Greg's idea. So it was like, oh my gosh, the ding is perfectly timed with this insight.
It's gone. I've moved it. The idea has been moved to another room. That I think is important, which is, it goes back to the conversation we had a little bit earlier. So I think when you're creating things, you don't go immediately to execution and expect everyone to get it. I don't know if that makes sense, but that can be a bit precarious. And so if you're using these ideas and insights to drive change in a way that an organization is going to market, you're thinking about reinventing a guest experience, you're thinking about working differently, changing product. How do you take the organization with you? Right? How do you get people to a place where they understand that? Buy-in for people is super important. That I think can be a bit precarious, Chris.
Well, and it's such an interesting dynamic because I think especially now there's this idea of a bias toward action. And you mentioned earlier, everybody wants to get to the solution. Let's get to the answer so that we can act, so that we can test, so that we can get things out there. And I love action. But at the same time, if you act on something that isn't ready yet, then it will tumble and it will fall. And then people will say, oh, I guess it wasn't a good idea. And I says, well, no, the idea actually is still really good, but we tested it too early and it wasn't ready for prime time.
Yeah, I think those things require a lot of thought because I, like you, I have a bias to action too. And, we've grown up in a culture over the last good few decades, right? Which is, you think about software development, right? We're in beta. And I think that's right. And I think we learn through beta. And I don't think everything has to be exactly perfect. But I do think you have to make a judgment call about how you share ideas that are potentially changing the way that organizations work, right? The way we think about ourselves, the way we go to market. At least give people the opportunity to understand why you're doing it. Put it into context for people. Find a way of inspiring people to come on the journey because then you create advocates, then you create change. Then I think it's sustainable. I think that's a leadership call.
So you mentioned earlier about insights being useful, being actionable. And I remember at BBDO, you told me, we want insights that are interesting and useful. So if it's not useful, Chris, it's not an insight, at least not for the brand we're working on, right? So what are some other key characteristics of an effective insight besides being useful and actionable?
So for me, they're sort of points of inspiration. And I think that great strategy people, insight people, are responsible for trying to find them, right? Trying to mine them. And then I think the other thing, Chris, is creating them as a way in for other people, right? Making them meaningful for other people. I think the obligation isn't just to find a thing, right? But is to make it in some way understandable and usable for people. You've got to be able to throw it into something that's a currency at the end of the day. There's a bit of provocation, I think, in a great insight. I don't think there's one way of getting to them. And I'm old enough to have probably tried every method that there is.
Well, that's a good segue to this question, which is, what are the most interesting ways that an insight or an aha moment started to come together for you on a project? Because again, an insight can start with a data point. It can start with something somebody says, but that itself is not the insight. That can be kind of a pause and reflect moment and say, that's really interesting. I hadn't been thinking that way before. But then you have to connect the dots and get to these other places. But it starts a lot of times with some kind of initial spark. Can you think of any examples where, an unexpected spark happened that then led you down the path to exciting places?
Yes. I go back to some of the early work we did when we were working on HBO. We were really trying to figure out what it was. So what's this thing about HBO, that is different, that makes HBO stand out? And so, we did all the stuff that you do, all the left brain stuff. It's like we talked to people and we did all the analysis and try as we might, we couldn't turn it into anything that kind of made sense to anyone else, but we had a hunch. So brilliant planner who worked for me said, let's do a deprivation. So let's take it away from people. And that's what we did. So we paid people, and we paid them quite a lot of money. I remember at the time thinking, well, I wouldn't mind doing that. But we paid people money not to watch their destination television. And I remember about 2 weeks in, Liz coming to see me and saying, I keep getting these people calling and saying they're pulling out of this study because they don't like it. So that's where we figured these are the most interesting people, let's talk to them. So why were people pulling out? And the reason that people were pulling out was because that inability to watch that programming, that destination programming that HBO had, took them out of culture. I don't think we'd have got to that without taking HBO away from people. And what they missed, and that actually the business that HBO was in was cultural currency. That's what they provided for people. It's not TV, it's HBO. I remember also as we were working on a pitch for a big hardware company, a big hardware retailer, and we had done all the stuff you're supposed to do, right? We looked at every piece of data, done store visits, talked to people internally, done the stake, tick, 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 and we were getting nowhere. We're like, oh, they're exactly the same as the other one. But that's not going to win us the pitch, so we have to come up with something different, and we need to change the dynamics in the category. So we took a trip on a rainy day to a store, one of their stores in Brooklyn, to go and experience this business, this brand, and figure out what it was like in real life, because we were going to find the nugget right there in the store. And I was going to release the creative brief. And it was dreadful. It was really dreadful. It was an afternoon of watching people come in, and buying screws and hammers and plumbing bits. And it was a rainy, horrible day, and everyone was miserable. As we were standing outside, this horrible rainy day, waiting for one of the team to go and get the car, I was standing there with another planner. This woman came careering toward us with a giant cart of wood and paint, and it was completely out of control. It wasn't even a car. It was one of those things that doesn't, you can't control them. So the planner and I, who were standing outside, saw this woman careering out of control, and just as a human reaction, first of all, we thought she was going to mow us down, so we kind of went to help her and stop. Anyway, the three of us ended up laughing outside and connecting and getting soaking wet and pulling this wood back on this cart, and we just started the conversation. And I wasn't a planner in that moment, by the way. I was just a human being. And what are you doing with all this stuff? Why are you here? Why do you have all this stuff on your cart? She told me this fantastic story. Told me a story about how she and her friends were building a bedroom for her daughter, who was 6 years old, who had always wanted a princess bedroom. And she said, I can't afford to buy all the stuff, right? So we're going to build a bedroom, and we're going to have people come, and we're going to build this bedroom together. So she had enrolled her friends. And it really stuck with me that night. And I was thinking about, why people buy this stuff and what it means and what she was creating. That was the moment, honestly, Chris, that sparked the brief. And I remember calling the creative director that night. We've been struggling to get to the right idea for this pitch. And calling her and telling her the story. And I said, what she's building was, first of all, it's very creative, right? It's not about buying a thing and fixing a thing and mowing the lawn. It's not very practical. And everyone was this very sort of male category. And this was a completely different dynamic. This is about what you can do, right? What you can build. And it's full of love, and it's full of creativity and relationships and homes and stories and humanity. And we went from there, and we won the pitch, and it was great. And, the work that came out of it was emotional and changed the way that we thought about the category. So I love that as an example of, how you find insights. They can be very random, right? It's not a left brain activity. You never know when you find one.
Well, that's one of the things I love about the process, is that you have to have all your senses open all the time, and really seeing people, really hearing people, noticing those little things. Yeah,
I think one of the things that's a bit daunting about starting the process is that I think as humans, we like the order, right, of knowing what it is we're supposed to be doing, because that will allow us to get from A to B. And the living truth of being a strategist is that you really have no idea. So yes, there's a list of things we're supposed to do, and we should have a process. But at that point where you're turning that into an insight that becomes an idea, there has to be the right brain piece of it. There's a leap, I think, right, of creativity. So you've got to be okay living in the fact that you're going to trust yourself, trust your team, right? Trust the conversation. Go with this myriad of things to get you to a place that is going to open up opportunity in a way that it wasn't there before. And I'm sure that there are people who love it. You love it. I love it. And there are people who think, I can't think of anything worse to do for a living. It's like, how terrifying is that? Because it is a blank sheet of paper. And I love David Lubar's, and he was my partner for many years. But I can tell you now, the pressure of a pitch brief breathing down on you with David saying, well, what? Okay, where are we starting? Where are we starting? Where are we starting? You just got to go with it. You got to go there, and you got to trust that, you do all these things and you create these connections, and you'll find something, right? It's in the humanity and the conversation with other people, I think.
You bring up an interesting issue around pressure. How do you deal with that pressure? How do you stay sane when there is that pressure, multi-million-dollar pressure from clients, from creative directors to deliver something, an aha moment that's going to change things, break things open? Do you have certain techniques to help you stay calm and not get caught up in the chaos?
Well, I have a really good wine collection. You learn to trust the process, right? And to be with other people. I think with access to an understanding of what's happening in culture, of how people relate to brands, of what they think about in categories, what matters to people, there hasn't been a time yet in my career where we haven't found a thing. Now, can we scientifically say that what we found was the best thing? I don't know. We're never going to be able to prove that, right? But we've found things that will move the needle on. And I also do honestly think there are times when it's not a linear process and you have to walk away, walk away from it, and you've got to go walk the dog. I remember reading a book a few years ago called The Extended Mind, which is how we work as people and not being confined to, it is literally bad for us when we're trying to create and think about things differently to sit in confined spaces. It is literally bad. We need to be in nature. We need to be provoked by other things. So whatever it is that does it for you, whether it's listening to music or making something or getting up and drinking your coffee or just not thinking about it for a while and taking a walk, I think those things are incredibly important. I think about the Medicis, right? And I think about what they did. They created environments where people could literally create and do their best work. They didn't put people in a corporate environment and expect them to create things that were magical. I think you've got to respect that. When I'm in thinking, I can't work with masses of noise around me and distraction. I just can't do it. Like I can't sit in an open environment. All I can hear is other people talking. Not massively helpful to me. And different people work in different ways. And I said to you, I need Sharpies and white pieces of paper. It needs to be immersive for me.
You've mentioned the Sharpie and paper, and I remember I was working on a project at BBDO, and I had built this presentation that was like 100 slides long, and you had me come into your office, and you rewrote my presentation by hand on like 10 or 20 sheets of paper, and you said, this is the story. Because I knew it was long. I knew that my presentation was long. But I felt like, no, I got to say this. I got to say this part. And this, if I don't say this, there's not going to be enough context. And you just trimmed it down to like 10 or 20 slides. You were just writing headlines on sheets of paper. You said, this is the story. And so my question for you is, how did you get so good at editing and getting to the essence of the story?
I don't remember torturing you like that, but I probably did, and I apologize for that. I think that, we've got to get people to fall in love with where we're going quickly, right? And they've got to feel it. And I think we don't need anything in the story that doesn't really help us get there. And I'll give great credit to people like David, actually, and Andrew, who really helped me think like that, because boy, oh boy, are these people impatient. And, they're like, yep, yeah. I'm like, okay, right. And I'm trying to work it out in my head, so I learned quickly. it's like you've probably got their attention for about 30 seconds and then they're bored. I think I do a lot of work which is sort of working back from where I'm trying to get to. You know you've done the work. So what are the things we really need to pull out of that? What are the headlines you need to hit for people to take them? What are the breadcrumbs? What's the path you're going to build to get people there? Joking aside, we always start by building presentations by saying, oh, this is where we're going to end up. So what are the points we need to make along the way, right? What are the things that we need to tell people, and how can we do that in a way that's interesting? And I think if you start with a headline piece of it, it sort of forces you into not 100 pages, not going down the rabbit holes on the way there. But these are the salient things you need to understand.
I think the challenge for me, there have been times when I've been able to cut to the chase, get to the heart of the story quickly. But I've also had situations where I will trim things down, have it be nice and short and sweet. And someone says, well, how'd you get there?
Yeah. Well, people think in different ways too, right? We were talking earlier about not just the sort of the what you do and the why you're doing it, but the how you do it. And so one of the things that we spend time on is thinking about who's in the room. And when you're presenting to CEOs of large companies who are dealing with myriad things, complex things on a daily basis, they think and work in a different way. And so I think respecting the person that you're presenting to. So I don't think it's always 10 pages, Chris, or it's always 20 pages, right? You tailor it to who you're presenting to. And some people, you're right, some people need the working out.
Yeah, that's a great point. Do you know how much you changed my life by hiring me as a strategist at BBDO?
I don't. I hope it was changed, not ruined, Chris, right?
It's a positive change. There's this haircut place called Visible Changes, and I've always felt that's a funny name for a haircut place because it's not saying it's positive. It's just saying it's a visible change. It has been a positive change. I know it was a long time ago, but do you remember anything from our interview or the process back in 2007 when Chris, wet behind the ears, came in and met you for the first time or the second time?
I remember thinking that you were incredibly clever and incredibly quick, and you were incredibly well prepared. You really thought things through, and that was very impressive. You knew what you were there to do. I also remember you being an interesting presence in the room. You were immediately kind and interesting at the same time, and you were not Mr. Corporate Chops. I was never going to hire Mr. Corporate Chops. That was never going to happen. There's a warmth about you and a smartness about you. And I thought, well, this guy's going to be great. People are going to love him.
I'm blushing.
Good, it's radio. Doesn't matter. I remember all of this.
I remember you asked me what my hesitations were about joining a corporation like BBDO or an agency like BBDO. And I was vulnerable with you. And I said, well, my impression of kind of corporate America is that people bark at each other, that there's yelling and all of that. And you said, well, I don't bark.
I don't think I do. I'm not a big believer in that. I'm a carrot, not a stick, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
Don't believe in sticks. I know a lot of people do. I think it was Bezos. And, he should know, right? Because he's made a lot more money than I have in my career. So he's right and I'm wrong. But that thing about keeping people feeling scared every day, not for me. No thanks. Not interested. Keeping people smiling, keeping people wanting to be there, keeping people wanting to work together, keeping people inspired, right? Yeah, I'm going to choose that.
Yes, there's going to be uncertainty anytime you walk into a room with a business situation or anything else. But how can you bring out the best in people and not just encourage fear?
I think in the business that we're in the business of creating opportunity, in the business of what can be possible, I don't see why joy and humor and kindness and ambition as an alchemic mix aren't a better version than keeping somebody playing by a set of rules that don't fit the way that we live and think any longer.
A good philosophy lesson there. All right, so on to the speed round. Here we go. What's your favorite word in English or any other language?
Darling.
And why that word?
I really like it because, first of all, I like it written. I love typography and I love the way it looks. And I actually have a great Hugo Guinness piece in my house that says darling in red on a white background with an exclamation mark. And I love it. Secondly, because if somebody starts a sentence with darling, it is unlikely to go badly. I think something good comes after it. So I like that one.
I love that. That goes back to disarming people, which is very effective. How would you describe what you do to a 5-year-old?
Oh, how would I describe what I do to a 5-year-old? I don't know how I would describe it to a 5-year-old, but I think I would get down to the 5-year-old level and I would get into the toys and I would get into the play and I would do problem and puzzle solving and have fun with them and tell them that I get paid to do that. Build something great out of the toys, probably.
What's the most recent good book you've read or a movie you've watched or a TV show?
I just saw I'm Still Here, Walter Salles movie, which I thought was brilliant in almost every regard. Brilliantly cast, written, acted. Honestly, I knew really nothing about that period of history. So I loved it because I learned a lot as a result of it. What else have I seen recently? I watched The Last of the Sea Women, which is a fantastic documentary about women off an island in Japan who are diving for seafood and their livelihood is being threatened by the modern ways of the world. And the feistiness and determination of these women and their compassion and their sense of teamwork, I loved it. Inspiring. It was escapist television for me. Loved it.
I'm going to add that to my list.
The other book that I'm reading, again, I've got all these books that I should be reading and I keep reading the same books, but I love this book and I'll probably keep reading it forever and ever by a woman called Susan Rogers. She was a sound engineer for Prince and she's a neuroscientist. So I went to some lectures that she did, but the book is about what the music you love says about you. So it's in the intersection of science and the soul of music. I love it. It's really interesting.
That sounds like a good pairing with something with Oliver Sacks as well, with Musicophilia.
That's right. That's right.
Is there a brand whose work you really admire or you think to yourself, oh, that's so good, I wish I'd come up with that?
Yes. It's a British brand called Fern. It's FERN. And it is a fragrance brand. It's hard to describe. I will just tell you that everything about this brand for me is perfect. First of all, the product's amazing. I think the concept is amazing. Everything about the brand is so perfectly done. It really made me think about attention to detail in a way that I haven't done for a while. It really provoked that in me. I was like, how did you get that right? So first of all, the packaging that arrives in is extraordinary. So it's perfectly functional. It is ecologically friendly. It is beautifully crafted. Every single thing that they've done, right? Every ingredient in it, it comes with a digital ticket to a film that they've made about making of this fragrance, right? And they're seasonal. So they just sent another one. I haven't watched it yet. You scan it, you watch the film. It's just extraordinary. It's a brilliant, brilliant brand. I'm very envious of how they came up with it.
That sounds amazing and incredibly immersive.
It is. It is. But which, when you think about fragrance, it ought to be, right? I find it fascinating that a brand that is a fragrance brand can get you to buy it at a distance without smelling it. One of the things that they do is send you, although you subscribe to it, you have the right to say, I don't like this fragrance, I don't like this season's fragrance, I'm going to send it back. So they send you a beautiful piece of clay, crafted and stamped with a small tester that you can spray the fragrance on, and you can decide if you like it. And if you don't like it, you just keep that and send the fragrance back. It just, every single aspect of it is brilliantly done. I have another one, which is a small brand called Ground Up. And Ground Up is a nut butter brand out of Portland, Oregon, right? So if anyone likes nut butter, this is the Rolls Royce of nut butters. Every jar is handmade in our Portland, Oregon kitchen by a team of motivated, capable, and smart women who are getting back on their feet thanks to you from the founders. So, it's purpose packaged in a way that's utterly authentic. And I think if they can do this, big brands can do this.
Absolutely.
And anyway, who doesn't want coconut cardamom with chia seed nut butter on a piece of toast, Chris?
That's some next level nut butter right there.
It really is. So next time you can't come up with an insight, make a piece of toast and stick with some nut butter and see what happens.
It's certainly going to make my synapses fire in my brain. What's one of the most interesting jobs you had before you got into strategy and planning and advertising that has helped you do your job better? So
100 years ago, I used to control, before the days of Uber, I used to control taxis. So I would have physical maps and I would have 50 drivers and a lot of people who wanted taxis immediately. And I would have to figure out how to get this person. Oh, and by the way, you have to balance out, Chris, who's getting longer rides and shorter rides. Otherwise, the drivers don't like you and you can annoy them and you can annoy the customers. So that was like a giant sort of organizational mess every Friday night. And it was actually really good fun and I loved it. I did that. It made me feel fine with all this just different stuff going on, with people sort of chatting and screaming at you because they didn't get their car quick enough or they were waiting in the rain or did I know the geography of my town? So I did that and I loved it. It was really fun.
That sounds like a fascinating and somewhat stressful job.
It was wild.
What's a piece of advice that you got early on in life or in your career that you still remember to this day or that you think of often?
I remember an ex-boss of mine saying to me one night over dinner, he said, the most important thing that you can do is to not care. And I said, I can't. What do you mean like, not care? And he said, well, what I mean is you need to act in your profession, in your professional life. You need to do it in a way that you're liberated from your paycheck. You shouldn't be thinking about that. And he said, don't be caring too much about that. Otherwise, it will not allow you to be who you are. And I didn't understand it for a long time, Chris. I couldn't get it. And I was thinking, well, that's because, you're much older and you've made lots of money and you can afford to do that. And then I realized years later how I translated it for myself was that taking no risk is the most risky thing that you can do. It doesn't result in great work. And you've got to be brave and you've got to take what feels like a risk is often not a risk.
Well, Tracy, I feel like you took a risk on me. I was coming out of grad school and we met each other. And I remember I met with Troy and Ozzy and a few other people. And you said, I think we'd like to keep you here in planning if that's okay. And you really did change my life. So thank you for that. And thank you for this conversation today.
So welcome. It's so good to talk to you. And it wasn't such a risk, right? It wasn't such a risk. One of the things that I learned about this experience is you have the most amazing radio voice.
It's all in the mic, Tracy. It's all in the mic. Thanks again to our guest, Tracy Lovatt from Batten Co. If you want to connect with Tracy, you can find her on LinkedIn. And check out some of our earlier episodes with Greg Hahn from Mischief, Andy Pearson from Liquid Death, or Alina Burrows, forensic scientist and star of the hit show Crime Scene Confidential. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast platform and share it with colleagues and clients who could use some inspiration. Just send them a link and say, you see, this is what I'm talking about. Insights! If you're looking for even more ideas and aha moments, head over to chriskochek.com. There you can find some of my newest online courses, case studies, and creative exercises for building insights and breakthrough ideas. And while you're there, make sure you subscribe to the Lightbulb newsletter. Every Thursday, I share 3 aha moments that are guaranteed to inspire your next project, creative briefing, or campaign. Special thanks to Michael Osborne at 14th Street Studios for producing this episode, and thank you to Megan Palmer for additional editing and production support. Until next time, keep looking for patterns, finding contradictions, and asking what if more often.